each other, worries piled up endlessly, and every day seemed to demand more than he could give. Even in moments of stillness, his brain refused to rest. He would lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, replaying conversations, imagining worst-case scenarios, and overanalyzing decisions he had made days, months, even years ago. It was exhausting, and yet he believed it was necessary. After all, if he didn't think constantly, if he didn't plan, anticipate, and control, he feared everything would fall apart. Life, as he saw it, demanded vigilance, and any lapse in mental activity felt like failure. He had tried to convince himself that this relentless activity was a sign of ambition, intelligence, and strength, but deep down he knew it was slowly consuming him. He tried solutions. He read books about mindfulness, watched videos on meditation, and listened to podcasts about mental clarity. He joined gyms, ran in the mornings, and even attempted journaling. Some techniques seemed promising at first, but the relief they offered was always temporary. As soon as he returned to the outside world, the noise returned, louder than before. Every ping of a notification, every email, every fleeting thought seemed to pull him back into the chaos. It was as though he was trapped inside his own mind, a prisoner to thoughts that refused to let him breathe. The harder he tried to escape them, the more powerful they became. His mental exhaustion began to affect other parts of his life. He snapped at colleagues over minor mistakes, missed moments with friends, and struggled to focus on simple tasks. He felt a growing sense of isolation, as if nobody could understand the storm inside him. Even when surrounded by people, he felt entirely alone. One morning, after a particularly restless night, he decided to take a walk in the park nearby. The sun was just rising, casting long, soft shadows across the grass, and a gentle breeze brushed against his face. At first, it was simply a distraction, a way to step away from his thoughts for a few minutes. But as he walked, he began to notice things he had never paid attention to before. The birds moved with effortless grace, hopping from branch to branch, singing without concern. Leaves rustled gently, carried by the wind, and the sunlight played across the surface of a small pond, creating patterns that shifted and changed with every ripple. It struck him that none of this required force. The world was functioning perfectly, without anxiety, without struggle. Everything around him existed in harmony, in peace, without effort. For a fleeting moment, he felt a sense of wonder and curiosity. How could the world remain calm when his mind felt like a hurricane? He paused and sat on a bench, taking a deep breath. He realized he had been living under a misconception, that peace was something to be found outside of himself, in circumstances or achievements. Yet here was proof that tranquility could exist simply because it was natural, inherent, and effortless. The birds did not overthink where they would fly next. The wind did not strategize or plan. The sunlight did not worry about where it would shine. Life carried on, calm and beautiful, without demanding mental effort. If the world could maintain this balance, why couldn't he? This simple thought planted a seed of realization. Perhaps, he considered, the problem was not life itself, not the responsibilities, deadlines, or challenges, but the way he allowed his mind to interact with them. Perhaps his thoughts did not need to dictate his emotional state. The next few days were filled with experimentation. He decided to approach his mental habits differently. Instead of resisting thoughts, he would observe them. Instead of trying to chase clarity, he would let it come naturally. Whenever anxiety or overthinking arose, he would pause, breathe, and simply watch the thought pass, as if it were a cloud drifting in the sky. At first, this felt strange. His mind resisted, insisting that every worry required immediate attention. The first attempts often ended in frustration, with thoughts laughing at his attempts to remain calm. But he persisted, reminding himself that true mastery of the mind was not about suppressing thoughts but about understanding them, about recognizing that they were temporary visitors, not permanent rulers. Gradually, small changes began to appear. He noticed that he was no longer reacting instantly to every impulse of worry. A minor conflict at work no longer triggered hours of rumination. A forgotten email no longer became a catastrophe in his head. Even during stressful moments, he could feel a space between the stimulus and his reaction, a brief pause where choice existed. That pause was revolutionary. It gave him control he had never experienced before. He began to understand that calmness was not a reward for achieving success or eliminating problems. It was a skill, a practice, a conscious way of engaging with life. And as he practiced, even in tiny increments, the storm in his mind began to lose its power. He also began observing the impact of this practice on his emotions. He realized that fear, anger, and sadness were not enemies to be fought, but signals to be understood. They were indicators that demanded attention, not domination. By facing them calmly, he discovered he could learn from them without being consumed. Over time, moments that once triggered panic or despair became opportunities to exercise his new skill of mental calm. He noticed an increase in focus, creativity, and clarity. Life's noise was still present, but it no longer felt suffocating. His mornings were no longer dreaded, and sleep gradually returned as a soothing balm rather than a struggle. He understood now that calm was not an absence of challenges, but the ability to remain centered amid them. The realization was life-changing. The first act of his transformation was complete. He had moved from being a prisoner of his thoughts to becoming an observer, a conscious participant in his own mental landscape. And with this awareness came hope, the hope that the rest of life, with all its complexity, could be navigated with clarity, composure, and inner peace. This was only the beginning, but it was a beginning unlike any he had ever experienced before. Even after discovering the first glimpses of calm, he realized that true mastery of the mind was far from simple. Thoughts still surged like waves against the shore, persistent and demanding. Old habits resurfaced, tempting him to fall back into the same patterns of overthinking and worry. There were days when anxiety returned with a force stronger than ever, when the weight of responsibilities and the pressure to perform made him question everything he had learned. But this time, he approached these storms differently. He reminded himself that calm was not a permanent state to be achieved in a single day, it was a practice, a journey, and it required patience. Each thought, each challenge, was now an opportunity, a teacher guiding him toward deeper understanding. He began implementing small, consistent routines to nurture his mental clarity. Each morning, he would dedicate a few minutes to mindful breathing, focusing entirely on the rise and fall of his chest. It was simple, yet revolutionary. When the mind wanted to wander, he gently guided it back, not with force or frustration, but with patience and compassion. He also introduced moments of pause throughout his day. Moments to observe his mental state before reacting, moments to let emotions pass without judgment, and moments to acknowledge the presence of stress without letting it dominate him. At first, these moments felt insignificant, almost trivial. But slowly, he realized that these small pauses were like planting seeds of calm that would grow into trees of clarity over time. Work and life challenges didn't disappear. Projects piled up, expectations from colleagues and friends continued, and the noise of social media and news kept intruding into his mind. Yet now, he discovered a remarkable difference: he could choose his response. Where he once would have reacted instantly with irritation or panic, he could pause, breathe, and decide the best course of action. Situations that previously drained him no longer had the same power. He noticed that calmness was contagious. His newfound presence began influencing those around him. Meetings became more productive, conversations more meaningful, and his relationships started improving naturally. People sensed the shift in him, even if they could not articulate it. His calmness became an invisible anchor, steadying not only his own mind but also the environment around him. The deeper challenge, however, came when he faced moments that tested everything he had learned. There were personal setbacks, arguments, and unexpected disappointments that pushed him to the edge. Old thoughts returned with force, whispering doubts and fears into his mind. At first, he felt the old panic rising, threatening to undo months of practice. But this time, he remembered the lesson he had discovered during his walks in the park. Thoughts were temporary visitors, and he had the power to choose how to engage with them. Instead of resisting or suppressing these feelings, he observed them carefully, acknowledging their presence without giving them control. He realized that calm was not the absence of chaos, but the ability to remain composed within it. He also learned to question the narratives his mind created. Anxiety often thrived on assumptions, exaggerations, and fears of the unknown. By challenging these mental stories, he discovered that many of his worries were illusions, products of overthinking rather than reality. For example, a project that initially seemed overwhelming transformed into a manageable series of steps once he approached it with clarity and focus. Relationships that felt strained improved once he communicated calmly instead of reacting impulsively. Each success reinforced his understanding that mastering the mind required awareness, patience, and intentional action. The more he practiced, the more resilient he became, and the more confident he felt in his ability to navigate life's uncertainties. He also began exploring other methods to reinforce mental calmness. Journaling became a powerful tool. He would write down racing thoughts and anxieties, which helped him see patterns and release the mental tension that built up throughout the day. He practiced gratitude, noting small moments of beauty and joy that he had previously overlooked, the laughter of a friend, the warmth of sunlight, the quiet moments of solitude. Over time, he noticed that these practices did more than calm his mind, they reshaped the way he viewed life. Challenges no longer appeared as insurmountable obstacles but as opportunities for growth. Mistakes became lessons rather than sources of shame or regret. His perspective shifted from one of constant struggle to one of mindful engagement. One of the most transformative realizations came when he understood that calmness was not a solitary achievement. It required self-compassion, kindness, and the willingness to let go of perfection. He had spent years punishing himself for every thought, every perceived mistake, every lapse in focus. Now, he allowed himself to be human. He forgave his mind for wandering, forgave himself for moments of weakness, and recognized that true strength came from embracing imperfection while maintaining intentional awareness. This acceptance freed him from the relentless pressure that had once dominated his life. He began to experience a sense of freedom he had never known. A freedom rooted in understanding, awareness, and choice. As weeks turned into months, the transformation became undeniable. He no longer reacted impulsively to stress or fear. Thoughts continued to arise, but they no longer dictated his emotions or actions. Calm had become a part of him, a foundation from which he could operate even in the most challenging circumstances. He discovered a profound joy in simplicity. The ability to focus on one task at a time, to be fully present in conversation, to appreciate the beauty of ordinary moments. Life was no longer a series of crises to survive, it had become a field in which he could practice mindfulness, gratitude, and intentional living. He realized that the journey was ongoing, that each day presented new opportunities to cultivate calm, but the mastery he had developed gave him confidence and strength he had never possessed before. By the end of this phase, he had achieved a remarkable clarity. He had learned to sit with discomfort without panic, to observe thoughts without judgment, and to respond to life with intentionality rather than reaction. He had discovered that peace was not a distant goal to be achieved, but a skill to be practiced continually. The second act of his journey concluded with a profound truth: calm was not something he found outside himself, it was something he nurtured within. And this internal calm would guide him through the final stages of transformation, empowering him to face life fully, fearlessly, and with unwavering presence. By the time he reached the final stage of his journey, he understood that calm was no longer just a practice, it had become a part of who he was. Life continued to throw challenges his way, as it always had, but the difference now was striking. Where once he would have been swallowed by anxiety, overwhelmed by fear, or trapped in spirals of overthinking, he now met each situation with clarity and balance. He could feel the strength in simply pausing, in observing without judgment, in responding with intention rather than reacting with instinct. This awareness created a profound sense of freedom, a liberation that he had never known existed. It was as though he had been carrying invisible chains his entire life, and now, piece by piece, he had unlocked them. He noticed subtle changes everywhere. Conversations with friends and family became deeper and more meaningful. He listened more intently, responded more thoughtfully, and realized that being fully present was one of the most powerful gifts he could offer, not just to himself, but to everyone around him. Work, once a source of constant stress, became an arena where he could perform at his best, without the paralyzing anxiety that had previously dictated his every action. Even during high-pressure moments, he discovered the ability to remain grounded. Calmness had become his secret power, quiet, invisible, yet capable of transforming everything it touched. He no longer needed external circumstances to change. He had discovered the internal engine that allowed him to thrive regardless of the world's chaos. What struck him most profoundly was how his perception of life itself had shifted. Challenges no longer felt like enemies but as opportunities, as lessons disguised in difficulty. Mistakes no longer carried shame but insight. He realized that his previous struggles had been a form of preparation, teaching him resilience, patience, and awareness. Every disappointment, every conflict, every sleepless night had, in a strange way, been guiding him toward this moment of clarity. It was not an instant transformation but a gradual awakening, a realization that life's storms were inevitable, yet the tempest did not need to dominate his inner world. He had become a master not of circumstances, but of his response to them. He began to notice the world differently. Ordinary moments became extraordinary. The smell of morning coffee, the warmth of sunlight on his face, the sound of laughter, all of it held a richness he had never truly appreciated before. Life had always been happening around him, but now he was fully immersed in it. The constant chatter of his mind had been replaced with presence, attention, and gratitude. Even his thoughts, when they arose, no longer felt like threats. They were like passing clouds, part of a larger, expansive sky, observed without judgment and released without struggle. This clarity brought a serenity so deep that he sometimes marveled at how distant it had once seemed. Relationships blossomed in ways he had never imagined. Friends noticed the difference immediately, his calmness, his patience, his ability to listen without rushing or reacting. Conflicts that would have previously escalated into arguments were now met with understanding and empathy. He realized that much of the tension in his life had not been caused by others, but by the way his mind had interpreted situations. By calming his thoughts, he had transformed not only himself but also the dynamics of the world around him. The more he practiced inner calm, the more he influenced the environment positively, like a steady ripple spreading across a pond. He also discovered the power of choice. Life would always present distractions, challenges, and unexpected events, but he now understood that he could choose how to engage with them. This awareness was liberating. He no longer felt the need to react to every thought, every notification, every passing worry. Instead, he operated from a place of intentionality. Decisions became clearer, actions more deliberate, and mistakes, when they occurred, were handled with wisdom rather than panic. The mastery he had developed over his mind gave him confidence, not arrogance, but a quiet certainty that no matter what life threw at him, he could navigate it with grace. One day, he realized that his inner calm had transformed his entire life. He felt more energy, more focus, and a sense of joy that was not dependent on external events. Sleep came naturally, and mornings were welcomed instead of dreaded. Challenges still existed, but they no longer dominated his mind. He recognized that the journey to this point had been long and sometimes difficult, but every struggle, every moment of doubt, every attempt to regain control had been necessary. Without those challenges, he would never have understood the value of true calm. The storms of life had taught him that the greatest strength is not in controlling circumstances, but in mastering the mind's response to them. In this final act of transformation, he understood a profound truth. Calmness is not an outcome, it is a way of living. It is cultivated through consistent practice, awareness, and the willingness to confront the mind's turbulence without resistance. It is the